Hello, my name is Erica Stafford. My presentation is on a significant other of mine that is in a spiritual journey that's much different than mine. At this time, his name, I'm going to call him Jim. He is a type of person that is still currently looking to discover his spiritual journey, and we had our conversation, which was very enlightening to the both of us. We connected in a way we didn't expect, and I learned a lot from him in regards to what he had discussed with me about his spiritual journey. So I apologize for my first video not working, and hopefully I will be able to answer any questions or hopefully give you some more information about my interviewee. So in regards to himself, he is a white Caucasian man that is 28 years old. He's heterosexual and is of the working class. So while he was telling me about his story, he was letting me know about who he was as a person and what it was like for him growing up in his household. So he was raised Lutheran. While being raised Lutheran, he had a lot of influences in his life. He said he attended church with his mother and his father. He also was at the point in his life where he had realized that he was being supported by his parents in regards to practicing a religion. Although his mother was super religious, his father was not. But his father did support the growth of his spiritual development in his children. So this is where he learned to be himself and learn what it is to have a religious grounding in a household. Jim had expressed that he was taught by pastors and Sunday school teachers about the word of the Lord. So he had other kids that he had grown up with in regards to learning what it is to be Lutheran and the Lutheran practices and religious traditions. As he told his story, he had expressed that at one point in his life, he just started to become disinterested in being involved in the Lutheran Church. He said this was about 13, 14 years old, and he was starting to do his own personal research pertaining to different practices and different religions and how they would affect him. So he started to discover his identity, I guess you would call it. The way that he had expressed it was his spiritual counterpart, you would say, who he felt most comfortable with. He felt as though he was being controlled while being under the Lutheran practice, and he didn't feel that many of the things that were being preached or being practiced, so he felt as though he did not fit. So as he did his research, he said that he takes a lot of what his Lutheran groundwork comes from and practices a lot of Buddhist traditions and is starting to understand Buddhism a lot more, but he really identifies as agnostic because he does not currently believe in a higher power. While learning about his spiritual development through Frame, it really made me realize that his faith development was very structured in his own parallel growth as a person. So although in the first stage was his primal faith, understanding that his caretakers were the ones that were providing for him in regards to the spiritual connection that they thought that he may be interested in. He had saw that while he was growing, and he was told different stories about how he had practiced religion, we got into the more in-depth conversation of his influences of his parents in stage 2, the intuitive projective faith stage. So he was starting to understand that he had a big influence in his relationships as a child, within his family and friends, and significant other adults such as his pastors and Sunday school teachers. As we get into the 5th stage, the mythical literal faith, this was when he was becoming more logical, his own point of view on what different symbolism was within the practices and traditions of the characteristic of God. Also understanding that he may believe in God and its rewards of goodness and punishment for evil. So he had a well understanding of what's fair and what was unjust, depending on the circumstance. He then goes into the synthetic conventual faith. This was when he was starting to listen to others and learning to understand and be more aware in his relationship to his own personal connection with a higher power. I believe that this right now is something that he's transitioned in from to the 5th stage, which is the interpretative reflective faith, which was really his relationship and connection to himself and his own personal research and what that foundation was made up of, his choices rather than his unexplained acceptance. He wanted to have a base of facts of what he felt was the right religion or what he felt was the right faith or spiritual path. So as we get into the 6th stage, he hasn't quite reached this level, but he's still doing his self-realization. He is doing his exploration, but most often than not, he's opening up to a part of something he didn't understand and is becoming more aware that of his grounding of his own faith influencing his newfound interest in his own spiritual journey. So as we get into his life as a Lutheran, we understand that their spiritual self-participation and understanding certain rituals, such as sermons, have been done in the Lutheran religion that he still practices when he attends church, when he attends a funeral. But most of all, he was understanding the self-care of how the stress of a physical person goes through, and how being of the Lutheran religion emphasizes that there's a lot of self-care practice. So within that self-care practice, it came to a very interesting question where, did he confide in others? Did he let people know what his self-care was when practicing? Did he do confession? Had he completed his sacraments? So it came down to the understanding of the evangelical community that was instructing him to know that he was able to have confession not only by himself but also with others. And he felt at that point, while he was growing as from 13, 14, 15, now in his late 20s, that he didn't need someone else to confide into. He needed to understand how to provide for himself as far as a self-care method. So he then discusses a lot of the self-care methods he started to adopt is through Buddhism, and the informal mental practices that he has involved himself with, such as meditation and yoga, alternative medicines. He's mentioned Tai Chi but has not grown into depth with it. He then discovers that in himself, he starts to develop his own discovery of his own spiritual calling. So in Van Hook, it states here, which I found very interesting to relate it, was that he himself was at the point of, in the point of Buddhism where he was understanding what Buddha Dharma meant, meaning the teaching or way of the Buddha, the awakened one. This was an understanding that Buddhism was to wake up to the true nature of the human condition and reality. So he was starting to understand his own reality and understanding his own acknowledgement of his life. And he's starting to understand what karma is. Project the positive, you get positive. You project negative, you receive negative. So as a client, I kind of put myself in the position to think like a social worker and understand that he had no real understanding nor interest in the higher power. So he then began to seek more into his lifestyle of being agnostic and knowing that his interest was his own personal growth while involving Buddhism and understanding that there was no one true God. So when he got into more of an agnostic understanding, he then came to understand that he was one that had no one true devotion. He was always going to look into involving himself into a higher power and understanding that it is okay to do that and know that he is able to put himself in the position to slowly believe in his own higher self-worth and understanding that research will provide that to him to understand what he is accepting as a higher power. So as we got into how he would like social workers to provide support and, the implementation of certain therapies, really he came to understand that he would like practitioners to understand that there's a root to his change and that with his root was a very Christian-based root, and he was not only having the coexistence of his past religion with his now newfound religion and spiritual journey, they were coexisting and combining together for him to celebrate his own spiritual traditions in the culture that he's now bringing himself up into. So within that, he started to have an understanding of what the religious culture he was starting to be enswarmed into. When he was doing that, he was becoming more understanding of what he wanted. So this made me sensitive in understanding the traditions he's implemented in his life regarding himself and what he wanted and what he wanted social workers to understand in regards to providing different spiritual resources and belief practices such as the American Zen. This is just making two religions coexist as one, as I had mentioned from Van Hook, but mainly having the development of a social worker understand and centering the focus and relating to the client's stressful times, knowing that they need this type of connection and this meditation to kind of bring them back to a center place in order for them to move forward in any type of treatment or any type of spiritual guidance. So within that, it came down to understanding what on a micro, meso, macro level is that understanding that a clinician is to understand and be self-aware and not implement negative outlooks on a spiritual journey regarding the client, and also having on a meso level understanding that agencies can provide different understandings of activities such as a genogram to help them decipher where the different connections of religions influenced him. So knowing his own religion, implementing Buddhism, even though he has no specific religion, he wants to understand the connection that he may have with a higher power and spiritual activity. On a macro level, clinicians should understand that a client's religion and background help them as a person and their upbringing. So 94% of Americans believe in God, whether it would be Christianity, Judaism, it could be, Hinduism. They believe in some form of a God.